Welcome back to Consciousness Studies. This is study number 4, and today we're going to be discussing the Vedic paradigm of consciousness. This paradigm begins with the idea of the self or consciousness itself being a spiritual body called Atma or the soul. And this is the actual cause of consciousness, which is the soul. So you have, in the Vedic paradigm, you have a spiritual body. And I'm just drawing a very simple body here. So in that spiritual body, you have spiritual senses: eyes, nose, mouth, ears, and sense of touch. So this is the soul, which is, to get more specific, composed of antimatter, we can say, as opposed to matter. So it's not material, it's antimaterial. So it has the properties in Sanskrit as Sat, Chit, Ananda, which means permanent form factor, consciousness, and bliss. So this chit property of the soul, this is where actually the quality and the property of consciousness, which is inherent to the soul. So we take this as the basis of consciousness, and then what happens is the soul enters a material body. And we're not going to get into the souls that do not enter material bodies, and that's part of the paradigm, is that most of the souls do not enter material bodies. They remain free and independent in the spiritual platform in their spiritual body. So we're talking about human consciousness in this world, in the material realm. So we're going to discuss it in that context. So this soul also has a mind, an intelligence, and an ego. These are also characteristics of the soul. So that's the paradigm for consciousness. That being, that spiritual being, the soul, is the conscious being. That's the real you, as they would say. So now what happens when you take a material body? When you take a material body, the soul enters into the material body through conception. And the first interface is the brain, the central nervous system, which acts like an interface, like a commander inside of a submarine, right? You're inside of a submarine. It's a dark box, and there's a guy inside, and so he cannot see what's going on around him outside, right? So they have this interface, which is called the periscope, and through the periscope, the guy inside is able to see what's going on outside. So in a similar way, that's the same problem, essential problem, that the soul faces when it enters a material body, which is basically a bag of flesh, right? So anything you put inside a bag of flesh, that's covering the soul, and that's not allowing it to perceive outside of that bag, that body, that material body, right? So that's the idea. So there's interfaces through the brain. So the brain and the central nervous system is linked to, which is the next level we're going to talk about, is the senses, right? The senses of the material body, right? The five senses, the five knowledge acquiring senses and the five working senses. So for each of these senses, so you have the ears, you have the nose, you have the eyes, right? You have the tongue, taste, and you have the sense of touch, right? The skin. So these senses are actually, these are reproductive, duplicate material knockoffs, inferior quality knockoffs of our original spiritual senses. That's the paradigm. That these are duplicate, like fake ones, just like the periscope. The periscope is an eye, basically, right? It functions like a camera, like an eye, but it's a duplicate eye. The original eye you need to see through the periscope. So the periscope is functioning like an eye, but it's really not an eye, right? It extends your eye and your vision, but it's an extension of your eye, right? There's no real eye in the periscope. That's just an extension of your eye. So in the same way, the material body senses are extensions of the soul senses. They're material, mechanical devices made of flesh and, blood and bones and nerves and cells that help extend and facilitate the perception of the external world outside the body that the soul is encased in, just like a submarine with a periscope. So so the brain is linked, the brain is the interface that links the ears with the soul's ear, right? The eye with the soul's eye, right? The nose with the soul's nose, the tongue with the soul's tongue, and the sense of touch with the soul's skin. So how that, it's just like a virtual reality. How are you able to translate material sights, sounds, smells, taste, and touch in a way that the soul itself can experience that, right? In a meaningful way that, simulates spiritual touch, spiritual sight, spiritual sound, spiritual taste, and spiritual touch, right? So that's virtual reality, right? That's a type of virtual reality. And this is high-level stuff. I mean, this is created by the Creator, the Supreme Being, in the spiritual paradigm, God. So it's high-level, this is high-level technology. But basically, it's a machine. The body is like a machine. And the more you study it, the more you realize that. So this is the basic paradigm. And then the next level after the senses is you have the material objects of the senses, right? These are the sense objects. So things to see, right? Sights, objects that have form for the eyes. So you have sight, you have sounds, you have smells, you have tastes, and you have touch, right? And there's different objects made, and then outside that you have the 5 great elements, right? 5 great elements. Five great elements, so you have, for sight, you have fire, right? Fire gives rise to vision. You have space, or ether, which sound travels through. You have earth, which gives rise to smells. You have water, which gives rise to taste. And you have air, which gives rise to touch. So these are the earth, water, fire, air, and ether or space, the 5 great elements in space, which create these objects, the sense objects, which the senses interact with, which get conveyed like sensors. Those signals, the sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, get conveyed through the brain, which is an interface for the soul and the spiritual body and its senses. So it's an ingenious arrangement. And so all these things that scientists are studying is basically starting with the brain and going outward. They say the structures of consciousness, right? So are they really the structures of consciousness? They're the structures of the extended devices, material devices that facilitate actual consciousness, the soul, to experience the material environment, which is, not the soul's natural habitat, right? The soul's natural habitat is the spiritual realm, which is made of Sat Chit Ananda. So everything in the material realm, beginning from here, going outwards, is actually Asat, Achit, and Nirananda. These are Sanskrit terms. So this is the opposite of Sat. So Sat means permanent form factor, right? The soul's form never changes. It's unchanging, it's permanent, it's eternal. It never had a beginning, it never has an end. Whereas everything that's material is Asat, which means it's always changing, right? So we say the constant in the material world is change. That's the only constant. So everything that's material outside of this soul, everything that's out here is Asat. It's always changing, right? Laws of entropy, conservation of energy, laws of thermodynamics. So the energy is never destroyed, but it's constantly in a state of flux. It's constantly in a state of change. Achit means unconscious, right? Chit means consciousness, knowledge. Achit means inert. So everything here in this material bubbles, layers of existence, these are all achit, they're unconscious. So you won't find consciousness in the material body, and that's why science has basically concluded, as we said in one of the previous studies. Niels Bohr, one of the fathers of modern physics, is saying all modern science, chemistry, math, physics, you name it, we cannot find the source of consciousness. We can't find consciousness in any of it because they've been studying this side, outside this bubble. So that's called achit, means inert. You will not find consciousness anywhere other than the soul. That's the real you. And then Nirananda, Ananda means bliss. So the soul in his original position in the spiritual realm is in bliss, and he's seeking bliss. This is the paradigm. The soul is seeking bliss, and God is this ocean, the source, the reservoir of bliss. So God can supply unlimited bliss to the soul because he's the reservoir, the origin of all bliss. And that's the basic thing that's driving the souls in this world also. They're looking for that bliss. They're looking for happiness. They're looking for pleasure with their senses. But everything here outside this bubble of the soul and the spiritual energy is Nirananda, which means there's no bliss. There's suffering, right? If you say my thumb, how much pleasure can I derive from my thumb? How much pain can I derive from my thumb? Almost unlimited. Pleasure is very minuscule. Dip it in some cream or, whatever. Massage it, rub it, whatever. Okay, so the thumb can get some pleasure, but how much pain can it get? Unlimited. You just keep hitting it with a hammer and it's going to keep giving pain, right? So mostly the senses and the material things are nirānanda, without bliss. So that's the root cause of dissatisfaction, that the soul is here in this world looking for bliss, but there's no bliss here. It's like a deer out in the desert looking for water, and there's no water. So that's the condition of the soul in the Vedic paradigm, and that's the condition or the relative structures of, we can say, external consciousness, right? These are structures, so everything inside this bubble is a structure of internal consciousness, we can say. And then everything outside here would be external consciousness, right? So, what are we studying? When we're doing consciousness studies, we need to understand, are we even studying consciousness? Or it's like saying, you're an ophthalmologist and you're studying the eye, but you're just, all you're doing is studying glasses and telescopes and microscopes and things that extend the eye, but you're not really studying the eye. So this is the, kind of earth-moving revelation from the Vedic paradigm, that all the study of consciousness and science isn't really studying consciousness at all. It's studying the indirect external extensions of consciousness, known as the brain and the material senses and the central nervous system. So that's pretty much what you're limited to your study when you're dealing with science, because you're dealing with your own external senses, and that's all you can perceive. So if you want to go beyond that, you're going to have to do experiments in spiritual paradigms that teach you how to understand and see yourself and to realize your soul. That's called self-realization. Self and God realization. So let's see what else we want to point out. So where does mind, intelligence, and ego come in with the Vedic paradigm? Basically, mind, intelligence, and ego are spiritual. They're an integral part of the soul and consciousness, but they become material or spiritually tinged or colored over based on the intention of the soul. So if the intention of the soul is to focus on external objects, right? With the external, to utilize the external senses to contemplate external objects, then the mind focuses on that, right? So if the soul's intention is to go external and get absorbed in the external objects of the material realm, then we say the mind has material thoughts, right? Material thinking. But if the mind is focused on the self, the soul, and other souls, right, and God, then we say it's spiritual thinking, right? Transcendental thinking. So again, it all really depends on the intention of the soul. So the soul is put in this marginal position. In the Vedic paradigm, it's called Tatastha Shakti. So in the Vedic paradigm, you have the internal energy and you have the external energy, and in between that is the soul, the Tatastha. The Tata is the line demarcating two realms, just like the line on the ocean the shore of the ocean, dividing the land from the water, that's called the tata, right, in between the land and the water. So the soul is tatastha shakti. So this is the internal energy, the spiritual energy, which is 3/4 of the creation. And the external energy is 1/4 of the creation. So now the soul is in the middle and can go between these two realms. So that's how we find ourselves in this material realm. But we can also transfer to the spiritual realm, the internal realm. So now the soul has to make these choices. That's free will. So the soul gets to choose, do I want to get absorbed in the external energy, or do I want to get absorbed in the spiritual internal energy? And, that's basically the goal of human life, is to transfer from the external energy into the internal energy and achieve a state of ananda in relation with God and the other souls that are free from the material bodies. So let's see what else. So the brain, what is the brain? The brain is I think the confusing factor. I think that's got a lot of scientists confused and distracted. And they're thinking that the brain itself gives rise to consciousness, that different chemicals, material elements that are part of the material body, the 5 great elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space, combined in a certain way, produces consciousness through the brain. But that's absolutely not the case. The brain is, it's just like a camera. It's like, it's more than a camera. It's the CPU, central processing center, for all the signals coming from all these senses, these external material senses. And it's an ingenious interface that somehow links up to allow the soul to perceive all these things. Just like if you're sitting in one of those, these transformer suits, like they have in the cartoons and all that. So the transformer, so there's somebody inside that suit. It's like a heavy battle, armored suit with weapons and cameras and jetpacks and all kinds of stuff that enhance your powers, right? So you're basically inside that thing, and you're basically in the dark, right? But inside that thing, you're hooked up to the whole body of the suit, right? You're able to, your hands and legs and arms and your eyes and ears, and you've got earphones in there so that you can hear. Otherwise, you're inside of a metal box, again, like the submarine. You're inside the suit. So to be able to perceive outside the suit, you have cameras and microphones and all that. So that's what the senses are, and the brain is the CPU running all that, all those signals into all your senses of your spiritual body, basically. So it's a little, it's confusing because, it's replicating the soul's, original equipment. But without the soul, it has no meaning, right? So what's the difference between a dead body and a living body? Because all the chemical, even after the time of death, if somebody dies, all the chemicals that were there when that body was alive and conscious are still there. None of the chemicals left the body. So why shouldn't it still function? Why shouldn't there still be consciousness? Why shouldn't that body still be conscious if it's an arrangement of chemicals? Because it's not an arrangement of chemicals. According to the Vedic paradigm, there's a soul inside, and when the soul leaves that body, it's just like an empty submarine without a captain, without anybody, without crew members. It just sits lifelessly. Any vehicle, any automobile, without a driver, without somebody inside running those systems, it's lifeless. It just sits there. So that's the difference between a living body and a dead body, according to the Vedic paradigm. So we'll stop there. We're at 25 minutes. I want to thank you for joining this study today. This is a very interesting study of the Vedic paradigm of consciousness. And if you have any questions or comments, please put those there in the comment section. Like this video if you liked it, and you can subscribe and get notifications for our upcoming studies. So thank you for your time, and we will see you on the next one.